a med student I was working with said, have you heard of this all beef diet thing? Because I've been struggling since I was about 18 with mixed connective tissue disease. And what I love about that and what I think is so effective about the carnivore diet and the message that you put out there is that it's so simple. Many of the kids I see in the ER are already overweight, and thus they end up getting simple infections that previously could have just been treated at home with some Tylenol and Motrin. And they get hypoxemic, they're getting pneumonias, they're getting skin infections, cellulitis, abscesses, which is really strange in some ways. And I think other doctors maybe you talk to feel similarly that I'm profiting from this illness, but I benefit from people coming in every day with the consequences of their chronic illness.
Hey, good morning, everybody. You guys hear me okay? We've got with us Dr. Shawn Murphy with us today. Dr. Murphy, how you doing, man? Good to have you here.
Hey, doing well. Such an honor to be here. Thank you so much, Shawn.
You are, correct me if I'm mistaken, but I think, aren't you in Tucson? Is that where you're at?
Yeah, Tucson. Yep.
And you're an ER doc down there, correct?
Yep, I'm an ER doctor here.
Gotcha. And so I know I was looking at your profile on what was formerly Twitter, now X. I followed you over there. So you do some carnivore stuff. You got some Bitcoin affiliation, it looks like. You're into, I guess, preserving some degree of patient autonomy and freedom, it looks like. All good things in my view. Let me ask you, so I guess, how long have you been doing medicine? What drove you to ER?
So I fell in love with medicine working as a volunteer EMT and firefighter in rural Wisconsin, where I grew up, and saw that I could make a meaningful impact. And I love the adrenaline and intervening and like the high stakes situations. And I just loved it. And over time, the thing that sort of made me gravitate towards that was that I also realized I wasn't committing anyone to dubious long-term therapies. I could just intervene on a simple problem, whether it's an abscess, a broken bone, or a cardiac arrest. And what they do after that is up to someone else.
Yeah, I get that point.
What initiated it for me.
Yeah, ER can definitely be, I can remember all the trauma call I used to take as in residency during the general surgery internship, basically. And it wore you out, though. It's all that adrenaline all the time. And a lot of, the way we were doing it, sleep, you were never any sleep. So at least you guys you probably work 12-hour shifts or something like that. But 10, 12, 14 a month or something, that's pretty typical, I think. I don't know what your situation is, but.
We work 12s and sometimes we're working 24s, but we're at a hospital that's not as busy. So it's actually doable without, yeah.
So obviously you said you're there for the acute problem. A guy breaks his arm, you get somebody ODs, or they come in for some exacerbation of chronic disease, heart attack, diabetic decay or something like that. What got you interested in, I guess it would have been, carnivore or dietary stuff, and I would imagine it's pretty hard to apply in that acute setting. So how did you get interested in nutrition?
I've always been an athlete. I was a wrestler most of my life, so I had to cut weight a lot when I was younger. So that involved doing a high protein diet and that kind of thing. But then it was actually for personal illness, and a med student actually who had read your book, who I was working with as an attending, which this is a pretty long tangent, but I was working on a project to develop human hookworm as a biological product for treatment of inflammatory bowel disease. You might have heard of that sort of hygiene hypothesis direction. I was working at the University of Arizona, and a med student I was working with said, have you heard of this all beef diet thing? Because I've been struggling since I was about 18 with mixed connective tissue disease. My mom had the same condition. I was on prednisone, horrible joint pain, swelling, anemia of chronic inflammation. And I was pretty much ready to accept anyone who had a hypothesis for what the root cause of this was, because that's not even a part of the dialogue in modern medicine. It's the hypothesis is you're not on the right drugs. That's basically the hypothesis that's proposed. And that's about it. That's the extent of for autoimmunity, for epilepsy, for all these conditions. There's no actual root cause analysis. So that to me was always unsatisfying. When this med student told me about your book and all beef diet, immediately I thought, I'm trying it. I'm doing it. That was a little over 3 years ago. I've been all in ever since. So that's how that evolved.
I guess the question is, did it help? I guess that would be the first question.
The answer is hell yeah.
Yeah.
I've been completely off of Plaquenil, any biological product. any drugs for rheumatic disease now for 2.5 years.
Yeah.
It was dramatic and unbelievable difference. And actually the first time I wasn't anemic, had normocytic anemia of chronic inflammation since I was a child.
And maybe a lot of people don't understand this, but a lot of times when you have some kind of chronic disease, you'll often get anemia associated with it. It's called anemia of chronic disease, and it could be, there's all sorts of diseases that'll lead to that. And so that's why you're experiencing that due to this mixed connective tissue disorder. But it's interesting. The first time I saw someone with Ehlers-Danlos respond to this diet really blew me away, because it's a genetic collagen defect. And I was like, why would a genetic disease get better with diet? But it did. And I thought that was really bizarre. But the autoimmunity, and you're absolutely right about that, our lack of curiosity as to why. Hey, doc, you're giving me an anti-inflammatory. Why am I inflamed? Well, I don't know. It could, depending on what it is. A lot of it's genetics, I don't know, bad luck. There's very little curiosity as to why this is. And like I said, it clearly wasn't a deficiency of Plaquenil. That wasn't your disease. And yet that's how we approach things this way. And so let me ask you, as an ER guy, maybe you're not at a level 1 trauma center or anything like that, but you've seen a lot of like community level trauma and chronic illness and stuff like that. How much of what rolls into your door do you believe, even in the acute setting, is related to lifestyle related issues?
Definitely 80% or above. Especially these days, complications of metabolic disease and diabetes causing, the thing I've seen the most lately is infections, abscesses, cellulitis, pneumonias, people's immune systems unable to cope with simple infections that they should normally be able to fight off or would be relatively minimal, that are exacerbated by their immune system basically being haywire. They don't have an autoimmune disease necessarily, but they have immune dysfunction as a result of metabolic disease. And that is what I see just constantly in the ER.
Been outside of healthcare, when you get somebody comes in with a rotten foot or some kind of Fournier's gangrene or something, it's just awful. It smells awful. Maybe it's Pseudomonas or some other, whatever it might be in there, particularly with the feet. But it's one of those things. It's like, how do you allow it to get to that? And yet we see people all the time. And I think it's just, they are so addicted to this stuff. They cannot stop it. And do you ever, if you're seeing a plethora of this stuff, do you ever have a chance to say, hey, look, this is something that you could probably avoid if you would do X, Y, and Z? Does that opportunity ever come up, or is it frowned upon in the ER to do that?
No, I should say every chance I get to intervene, I bestow, or I tell people all the benefits of, to start with, low carbohydrate diet. If they're willing to listen further, I'll go into a carnivore diet. But I have to say, you hit it on the head. It's an addiction, and it's crazy too, because normally we also treat opiate addicts in the ER, and a lot of people look at that and they say it's a shame, and there's all these causes. Literally, you hit it on the head. We have people coming in who need their feet chopped off due to an addiction, but we look at it, there's no intervention on the root cause. We just chop off their feet and send them out on metformin, and insulin. That's a serious addiction when your feet have to get chopped off. But it's not looked at it like that. It's looked at it differently than like an opiate addiction.
Yeah, I mean, and I've been the chopper. I've chopped off a lot of feet in my day. Chopped off feet and legs and fingers and toes and God knows what else. It's crazy, the breeding abscesses and whatnot. Let me ask, because we have this obesity epidemic as well. It's part and parcel of the metabolic syndrome. And so right now, the current rate of obesity in the United States, at least the last stats that they've collected, were 42%. It's probably higher now since the little pandemic we went through. But what percentage of your ER patient population is also suffering from obesity? Is it 42%, or would you say it's even higher?
Oh, no, no, definitely a higher percentage. I would say, we're approaching probably 80% of people who are overweight or obese in our population. It's pretty rare that someone comes in that's truly healthy. And most of those are going to be like orthopedic injuries, sports injuries, and everyone else, it's complications of metabolic disease, cardiovascular disease, infections. It really is a staggering change, and it was worsened by COVID. You're right.
Yeah, we had, I remember when I was doing my residency and doing a trauma call, the general surgeon who was running the trauma service would say, you would call trauma a disease, because a lot of people, there'd be frequent flyers in the trauma department too. These people that keep doing stupid stuff, getting drunk and crashing their car, getting into fights. And it was like, there's a certain subset. Some people, it's just unlucky. Something happens, you get injured. But then there's a subset of the population that are always coming in for trauma. And you look at their history and they got all these broken bones and spleens out and all this stuff. So you obviously, if you think about how somebody, because ER care is very expensive, as most people know. They don't want to go because the ER, I'm going to pay $6,000 to go to the ER. I don't want to do that. And most of it, a lot of it, I sure you have the frequent flyer in there. And there's some people that are like some of the psychiatric patients that are in there like every week. They're in there. Like, hey, he's back for another whatever. And you think about how much money we spend on just a very small segment of the population. It's like this 5% that use up 70% of the resources or some ridiculous number like that. And if you could just like, instead of taking them to the ER every day, just you could freaking feed them steak every day for a hell of a lot cheaper and probably fix a lot of the problems. Am I off base on thinking of this, or what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. And what I love about that, and what I think is so effective about the carnivore diet and the message that you put out there, is that it's so simple. And people are getting all this conflicting information. They go to the ER, I tell them one thing, then they get on the internet and they start reading, and then they see there's these other meat-based doctors, but they're suggesting other things. And then they go to the USDA, and then they see something completely different. And they're like, who do I trust? Do I trust the authorities, the doctor I just saw? But if you just keep it really simple, just eat steak, all of your problems will be solved. It's not every problem is going to be solved, but literally, like I said, maybe 50 to 80% of the problems I see in the ER could be solved by a simple intervention. Daily, twice a day, steak BID.
Yeah, I could write a prescription for that. It would be a hell of a lot cheaper. I just saw a new drug that I was watching TV, and one of the drug commercials came in. It's something called Xtandi. And I was like, what the hell is that? I never heard of it. It's a prostate cancer drug. $18,000 a dose. It's like almost $200,000 a year they want you to pay for this stuff. And it's funny, it was funded by the DOD and I think UCLA through taxpayer money. So the pharmaceutical company didn't even buy the cost, but they're still charging this ridiculous amount. I know you can buy a lot of steaks for $18,000 a month. I couldn't even if I was eating A5 Wagyu every day, I couldn't even spend $18,000 a month on steak. So it's crazy in that regard. What about, okay, so here's a question. You're an ER doc, a lot of MIs come in, myocardial infarctions, heart attacks. Oh my God, eating meat, cholesterol's got to be through the roof. What do you see? Do you get those labs? You probably don't. I know you probably slammed them with oxygen and morphine and whatever. I can't remember the protocols for that. But are you noticing high LDL on every one of them that comes in the door with an MI, or is it all over the place?
I don't measure cholesterol as part of my workup. That's usually after they're admitted. And personally, after reading your book, reading the cholesterol code, just doing my own primary research too, I personally I don't find that to be a very compelling line of workup for cardiovascular disease. It really, my personal opinion is that it's all metabolic in nature, metabolic dysfunction and insulin resistance.
How often do those heart attack patients present with comorbidities of diabetes, prediabetes, metabolic syndrome that you can assess? I guess obviously you're worried about probably what's going on right now. How do we get this guy from coding or whatever? Or do we have to intubate him or not? But do you have a sense of that? How much percentage of them walking in there that are in that condition metabolically?
I would say it's fleetingly rare that a patient doesn't have diabetes and has cardiovascular disease. I can maybe count on my hand the number of times I've seen a skinny 65-year-old male with no metabolic disease and no other health problems who comes in with a heart attack. Sure, it happens, but again, that is, like I said, that is vanishingly rare. It's just not something that is routine, whatsoever.
So now, okay, and that's fair enough. You're the one that's actually on the ground seeing this. So, because this is interesting, because they talk about evidence-based medicine. I'm like, talk about results-based medicine. Like I said, a lot of these study environments are not they're unnatural. They're highly controlled on what things they look at and it's what's actually happening in the real world. What about, okay, so you've been, 2.5 years eating a bunch of meat every day, controlling your own health conditions. Somebody has had to notice at work, right? Somebody like, hey, what are you eating steak again for? Do you eat at work at all? I guess if you're working a 24-hour shift, you have to, I would assume. Maybe not, but how does that play over with the folks you work with?
Oh my God, yeah. No, that's very well known. In fact, we give stars if as a compliment to our coworkers. And most recently, one of the ER techs gave me a star and said, "Thanks, Dr. Murphy, for the great shift." And they drew like tallow dripping down the side of my mouth because I'm always bestowing the benefits of tallow as a cooking oil. And I have a little hot plate in the break room where I cook ribeyes twice a day on my 24-hour shifts. So everyone smells the ribeye and they come by and they're getting their peanut butter sandwiches and they're like, "You're having another ribeye already?" But I have influenced some of them to step up their intake of higher fat, higher red meat intakes, and in general, low carbohydrate diet. And part of that is just the smell of a ribeye coming from the break room every time I'm on shift.
Hopefully you don't have any vegans working in the shift with you. That probably drive them crazy, perhaps. And there's one thing, and I'm sure it's not changed, but when I was in the hospital every day, there's even among the healthcare workers, a lot of just overweight, obesity, poor health folks. Is that still what you run into?
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. But that being said, a lot of these people can confidently say, healthcare workers who have education and knowledge and ability to interpret primary sources, that they're actually following what is being told, that the base of your diet, most of your calories should be coming from whole grain, and perfectly fine to have a treat that includes sugar and processed carbohydrates, and eat a lot of vegetables, which are essentially just filler and have no nutrients that you actually need to be satiated. And so they're, again, confused. I'm doing everything right, but I'm still overweight and I have an A1C of 9. So yeah, it's unfortunate. It's true, but
yeah, the hospital environment, and I assume the ER is the same. I mean, there was always junk. There was doctor's break room, patients bringing in, they're trying to be nice. Here's a plate of cookies. I baked you a cake or whatever. That's all over the place, right? I'm sure you have to probably walk through garbage all the time at work, I assume, right?
Oh yeah, donuts, and the other thing, people drink a lot of coffee in healthcare. The coffee drinks now, they're basically pure sugar. The added oat milk lattes with sugar and whipped cream. There's like 60 grams of sugar in some of these Starbucks beverages, and they're putting them back four in a shift. It's unbelievable. They're doing it presumably for energy, for caffeine, but these things are loaded with sugar. And then, you add in your high carb meal with that, and healthcare workers are in rough shape. There's some literature on that too. Obesity and metabolic syndrome among healthcare workers is pretty bad as well. It's really not that much better than the general population.
Yeah, and it's probably exacerbated, particularly for ones who work the shifts. A lot of the night shift folks are just getting hammered on their circadian biology. That's tough to deal with. Obviously, the mixed connective disorder, the autoimmune, the anemia of chronic disease is all resolved. Did you notice any other benefits from this so far? Any other just generalized, hey, this is pretty cool, or gee whiz, this is something I didn't expect?
Yeah, two things. So one, I put on 20 pounds of muscle, which I've always been active, and you just put on muscle so much easier when you're getting, not only, I think it has a hormonal benefit as far as increased testosterone, and then just making sure you're getting enough protein, which if you're on a plant-based diet is basically a full-time job. But yeah, just continuing my weightlifting, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and rock climbing, just doing that alone. Putting on muscle became fleetingly easy. One other thing was that, and what drew me to this initially as well, was I had been self-diagnosed and subsequently with a neurologist getting simple partial seizures, no loss of consciousness, but periodically I would get about 30 seconds of an olfactory hallucination, like a spicy smell, and I wouldn't be able to speak, but I'd maintain motor function. I could move. I didn't lose consciousness, but it was a strange constellation of symptoms, which essentially was resolved initially when I started the carnivore diet and relapsed when I introduced fruit and honey back into my diet as an experiment about a year and a half ago. So that was a huge benefit. And then subsequently now I had a relapse and I'm back on the wagon now with staying in a state of ketosis, which we've known for 100 years has been a benefit to all forms of epilepsy.
Yeah, that's definitely, I think, a pretty well documented indication for leaning towards ketosis. And I think in my experience, I see people that maybe, because there's a lot of different sort of protein fat ratios people do within a carnivore diet. And I see probably some of the neurologic ones, whether they're dealing with epilepsy or even some mental health disorders, they tend to maybe do better with a little bit higher fat. So it's interesting. It'd be nice to get more research in this. It's hard to get that funded. I can tell you, I've been trying in many ways. And what about downsides? Because any major downsides that you experienced so far?
I think the biggest downside of all is the societal reaction. And I actually had a girl I was dating who was a dermatologist say, I can't date you anymore because if this worked out and we ended up having children, you're going to want to feed them meat. And I was like, hell yeah, I would. And she's like, I think we would fight because I'm a plant-based doctor and I'd be worried about your cholesterol. And I think we wouldn't get along. And I said, have fun with that.
I guess I'm curious how that relationship started in the first place, because she may be vegetarian, maybe not a pure vegan or something like that. Or maybe she is. I don't know. I mean,
vegetarian, yeah.
Vegetarian and stuff. And did you like, because you can speak primarily the same language, you have equivalent levels of training. Obviously, she's more into skin stuff, but the basics of health and metabolic type stuff, she just wasn't compelled by what you were saying at all.
I guess I wasn't convincing enough. I tried to get her to read your book, but I think especially if you undergo traditional training, it's just anathema to suggest that we should be on an all red meat diet. And I do my best. I've convinced most of my family members, obviously, because they have to listen to me. And every time we get together, we generally have ribeyes and red meat. But people, you may bond with them over something else. A lot of my friends I bond with over rock climbing or outdoor activities. But that's a big hurdle if you're under the impression that cholesterol in the diet is one of the biggest factors related to your overall health and longevity and cardiovascular disease risk.
Yeah, I think we've made some big errors by myopically focusing on cholesterol as I remember it was the fifth vital sign. I mean, I remember that was like, it was one of your vital signs was know your cholesterol number. Like it's your vital signs, like it's as important as your blood pressure, your pulse, or respiration. And maybe that's not the main thing we should be focusing on. Maybe there's other things that are more important to concentrate on, but that was been hammered into us for, decades and decades. I remember in medical school when I was in the late 80s, when I first started medical school, it was like they were talking about putting statins in the water way back then. And that's not long after they just came out. And it was just something like we should put them in the water. And I see guys like a lipidologist, Thomas Dayspring, talking about we should strive for an LDL cholesterol of 20 to 40 milligrams per deciliter. I mean, there's no human on earth that has that unless they've got some genetic disorder or they're just pegged to the max with PCSK9 inhibitors. You're not going to get that. And he's saying that's normal, and it's just crazy where we have this sort of thing. Let's talk about, as a physician, ideally you're using your brain quite a bit. Have you noticed any change in cognitive? As you said, no more seizures. So it's probably good that you weren't having olfactory seizures and can't think for 30 seconds in the middle of a code or something like that. But how has it improved or in any way changed your sort of cognitive abilities in your mind?
I definitely, it's impossible to overstate how transformative it's been. And obviously we're on this podcast because we're both enthusiasts of this, but I really mean that from the bottom of my heart. It's been nothing short of transformative physically and cognitively. And I think the biggest difference I notice is that this may be attributable to the ketosis too, because I don't get really fatigued. I feel like my energy and my cognitive vigilance just maintains itself. Even sometimes I work 24-hour shifts. Sometimes I'm up at 4 a.m. I've been working all day. I don't get hungry. Those pangs of hunger where you feel like you desperately need some calories or a boost or some carbs to perk up. I feel like my energy is even and consistent, and that's enhances my ability to stay focused even after really long hours. And that has been a huge asset for my line of work.
Yeah, I think that just the energy supply is more stable and not so labile. When you're on a carbs, it's up and down quite a bit. And so everything, you got a lot of energy, you got more energy than you need, and you don't have enough, or it's going back and forth. So it stabilizes quite a bit. I don't know the size. When you're at the ER, are you the only doc in the ER, or are you the big enough one where there's several of them in there? Are you the only one for the group?
No, I'm very fortunate to be. So the hospital I work at, myself and my partners, we actually opened ourselves. We bought the building and took out a pretty large loan and built it out, bought our MRI machines, CAT scan, lab, ultrasound. So we're owners and partners, but it's small. It's a 7-bed ER. We have a tiny 3-bed inpatient unit, but it's single coverage. So it's all board certified ER doctors, but we're one at a time. And it's been quite a ride, but it's allowed us to have an unprecedented level of autonomy and obviously decision making. We own the building, we own the hospital. I'm the chief medical officer. So we get a very unique practice environment for emergency physicians, that's for sure.
Well, it's nice to have that, because a lot of times if you work for a big hospital system and you're an employee and Sometimes they do stuff you don't agree with, and you're kind of stuck with that. So that's good. You can at least determine some of your own fate. So, of any of your partners, I think you said we're seven of you guys in there. Any of them guys on board with the meat thing, or they all think you're nuts?
One of them is a hunter, so he, I think, intuitively knows that it's a good idea. So I think of all the partners, he's been the most open-minded to it. He hunts elk in northern Arizona. But besides that, I think most of the staff think I'm a little off my rocker, but hey, proof's in the pudding. That's what I say. No pun intended.
Yeah, I'm interested because you said you put on like 20, 25 pounds of muscle. That's pretty impressive. And as a wrestler, you'd have been used to cutting weight, and wrestling's, it's a hard sport. It's tough. And then now you're doing jiu-jitsu, and you can probably apply the wrestling. When I do jiu-jitsu and there's somebody who has a wrestling background, it's always harder. It's going to be a harder fight. There's no doubt about it because they've got that just extra level of skill. But how much, in order to put on 20 pounds of muscle, so how much did you have to eat? And maybe if you don't mind sharing what you weigh now, what you weighed then, and how much you felt you ate to do that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's definitely been some trial and error. And I think for me, one of the biggest take homes of all this was that science is something intuitive to every human being, and all of us are part of the body of knowledge of science, which amounts to trial and error and observing what happens with our own bodies. And initially, I weighed about 160 pounds, sometimes a little less, 155, 160, before I got into all this. Now I'm ranging between 180, 185. And that's usually eating about 2,500 to 3,000 calories, depending on what activities I'm doing. If I'm doing a lot of really calorie intensive activity like BJJ, or if I do a big mountaineering trip, and that breaks down to, I pretty much eat zero carb. Sometimes I supplement with extra fat, like extra butter or a heavy whipping cream and that kind of thing, to make sure I'm not eating too much protein and kicking myself out of ketosis. But yeah, usually 2,500, 3,000 calories, 100, 110, 115 grams of protein, and 200, 240, 250 grams of fat.
Yeah, that's probably just a little bit less than I eat, but I'm about 250 pounds right now, and not trying to gain weight at the moment. And I find that's one thing I found is I can do what I want, but I don't really suffer from. It's pretty easy to fluctuate up and down, and I can cut back without being very hungry, and it's quite easy to do. That I've seen. Are you eating typically twice a day, or many people fall into this twice a day eating pattern? Is that kind of what you do?
Yeah, I feel once you adopt this diet, that just becomes natural. Like, you don't need to tell yourself that this is good. It just, you don't get hungry. You eat a big steak, or you eat a couple big fatty burgers in the morning. You don't need to eat until nighttime. And it's not a disciplined thing. You don't need to talk yourself into it or undergo some kind of hypnosis. It just happens.
Yeah. So let me just ask, what prompted the fruit and honey experience? I know there's guys out there that are promoting fruit and honey. You need to eat that and stuff like that. And I would say you can try it and see if it works for you. But what prompted you to try it? And then why did you decide it wasn't right for you?
So I was following Paul Saladino. I read his book after yours, and he talked about how he was unable to tolerate the carnivore diet. He was having palpitations and side effects, which I have my own thoughts about what maybe was going wrong there. And he started talking about how he didn't think ketosis was beneficial, and that long-term ketosis could be dangerous. And I thought I'd give it a try, mostly because fruit and honey is super sweet and
tastes good. Yeah.
If someone tells you it's good for you, it's hard to talk yourself out of it.
So and excuse to eat more sugar, right? Basically, for some people, yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy too, because I think all of us have a little bit of a carb addiction, because if you've had carbs, how good they are, it's addicting. It's like telling an opiate addict that like tramadol is safe or something. But anyway, long story short, I didn't just go a little bit. I was eating basically a huge ribeye, and I would just spoon in the honey from the farmer's market by the spoonful. And so actually, about the time that when I was really full into this, I had for the first time ever, and the only time ever that it's happened, I had a full-on generalized tonic-clonic seizure. Mm. Luckily, I was with a friend with medical training. I was just sitting in a chair, so nothing bad happened to me. But that was a wake-up call that, wow, this is not good for my brain. Basically having all this sugar, whether or not I'm having insulin resistance or I'm diabetic, this is simply not good for my brain. And like we've talked about with the published benefits of ketosis, and now more recently with Chris Palmer and his book on brain energy and how dramatically ketosis affects mitochondrial function and brain metabolism. I was like, I need to stop this. So I completely cut out. For the past year and a half, zero carbs of any nature, and I couldn't feel better. And that was an unfortunate sequence of events. I don't fault anyone for trying something that sounds compelling to them, but I think, like you alluded to earlier, anyone with neurologic issues or any mental health history, I think you should commit to staying in ketosis and see what the benefits are for you.
Yeah, fair enough. And you'd mentioned that you'd speculated that what Paul was experiencing. Just out of curiosity, what do you think was the issue? There could have been 6 pounds of liver a week, or I don't know. What was the issue?
I haven't spoken with him, but I personally noticed that when I eat too much protein on the carnivore diet, I get side effects, like some of which you alluded to, some insomnia. Sometimes I feel like I have elevated adrenal hormones. I feel like that was a side effect I noticed when I ate a lot more saturated fat. I felt much better. I slept better. I felt like I had a sense of calmness. I didn't get any like palpitations or heart related symptoms. I think one mistake maybe some people make when they're just starting out on the carnivore diet, and again, I can't speak to Paul specifically, but making sure you're getting enough fat and experimenting with your level of protein. I know you eat probably a little higher level of protein that works really well. I think that can work really well for some people. Other people, maybe they need more fat. But I think that's something to play with, especially if you're not eating any carbs. Try eating more fat and see how that affects your body.
Yeah, you got to get energy from somewhere. And even when I'm at a level of fat, I'm still probably 60% of my calories are coming from fat. I'm always on a higher fat diet. And I think you contrast to the average American diet where it's something like 35% fat and about 50% carbs and 15% protein or something like that by calorie percentage. It's definitely, like I said, you got to get your energy from somewhere. What do you, like I said, in the ER, are you seeing, is the problem list changing from what, I don't know how long you've been in practice, but are you seeing a shift in what you're seeing more of versus like more ODs, more, I don't know, you said more infections. What's been the trend in the ER lately?
With COVID, obviously, and subsequently, we see just in general, people with, like I alluded to earlier, infections that typically wouldn't be that severe that are worse. And this even happens in children. Obviously, we have a huge issue with childhood obesity and now metabolic syndrome. And just thinking back in the 90s, I think it was odd when there was a kid who was overweight in your class. Now it's becoming, many of the kids I see in the ER are already overweight. And thus they end up getting simple infections that previously could have just been treated at home with some Tylenol and Motrin. And they get hypoxemic, they're getting pneumonias, they're getting skin infections, cellulitis, abscesses, which is really strange. Obviously in adults, that was the same. And we all are aware that people who had metabolic syndrome or overweight or obese who got COVID obviously had more likely to get severe illness. So that's been a trend that is unmistakable and just unfortunate. As we know, it's completely preventable, but it's a trend that unfortunately doesn't seem to be slowing down.
Yeah, for sure. Because you said I grew up in the 70s and I was born in 67. So I was a kid during the 70s. And basically I remember we had in our neighborhood, our entire neighborhood, I think we had one overweight kid. I remember he was the fat kid. It was because there wasn't any other ones. His name was Stephen Smith, but there's a lot of Stephen Smiths out there. So it's not bothering anybody, but I can remember now, I think it's something, if I look at it, I think the pediatric obesity statistics are something like around 20% right now. We got like 20% of our kids, that's 1 in 5 that is obese, which is amazing. I would imagine it was probably 1 in 50 back when I was a kid, something like that. So it's gone just absolutely crazy. Are you seeing, okay, here's another one. Ozempic is you're probably sure there's this the GLP-1 agonist, Ozempic or Mounjaro or some of the other, Wegovy, I think. Are you seeing any issues with that particular drug? Because you hear about people coming in with intractable vomiting or any side effects from you've run into.
I treated a few patients who came in with intractable vomiting who are on Ozempic, which I've tried to explain to them that. But what I see more often than that is other healthcare workers and family members asking me to prescribe them Ozempic. That's been a trend that's unmistakable.
Here's what it's interesting, because if you look at the way that drug works, it's obviously got a couple of effects, but it's an incretin mimetic. So it's doing what glucagon-like peptide would do, which is slower gastric emptying time down, decrease our appetite a little bit. It's the exact same thing that eating steak does, quite honestly. We know the effects of protein and fat in absence of carbs are going to slow the gastric emptying time, slow the overall digestive cycle, increase the satiety hormones of CCK and so on and so forth. So it's, I can prescribe it for you, but it's called ribeye steak. And you don't have the awful side effects of intractable vomiting, and because we're physiologically slowing down digestion for foods that normally wouldn't be slowed down for, because these highly sugary, high fiber foods usually pass through us pretty quickly. And I would argue that the fiber we're just trying to get rid of because we're like, I got no use for this stuff. Let me get it out of my body. Now you're prolonging its time in the body, and it probably has some deleterious effects for many people. So interesting to see.
That raises a question that I'd like to ask you, actually, which is the reason why Ozempic is so popular is because it's an intervention. There's intellectual property and it's distributable. And as we know from an economic standpoint, that's everything in medicine. If it can be distributed, if there's intellectual property, that's where all the research money goes. That's where all the recommendations go. That's where all the profit is made. That's everything. That's what drives medicine, is centralized, distributable interventions, whether it's a machine, a drug. And part of the reason I have so much respect for you, Dr. Baker, is that, and my question for you is, why is it that you avoid the low-hanging fruit? You could make so much money selling a supplement or a powder, testicle powder, or some kind of a beanie that protects against EMF or
Yeah, I think about that. And I see other people doing it. And like I said, hey, they want to make money, they got to make money. And a lot of us doctors that go rogue, you're like, as an orthopedic surgeon, I was making pretty damn good money. And now I'm like, I don't have that income source anymore. I've got to do something. And I just ethically, I don't want to rip people off. I just don't have it in me to say, yeah, I could say a story and I could say, yeah, some of you'll benefit. And I just don't want to do that. And like I said, we've got a company now, Rivera, which I think hopefully we can generate income. I'm sure we will. I'm very optimistic that we're going to be wildly successful and we're all going to do well financially. But it'll come for the right reasons, I think. And I think I think you are right. It's so much easier to make I could have made protein powders. I could have made supplements with the size of the audience I have now, but I'm just like, I'm not interested in that because I don't think it does anything. It doesn't really move the needle very much. Like I said, and maybe I'm wrong and maybe I'll just end up, nothing will happen and I'll just end up being some guy that could have made more money, but that's okay. I'm okay with that. But yeah, it's definitely, that's where Goldman Sachs asked the question, is curing disease a profitable venture? And they said, no, it's not profitable to cure disease. And so that's why we have so many drugs directed at these lifestyle interventions like weight loss and itchy skin and psoriasis. They're making money hand over fist. You look at all these, like all the biologics. I don't know, maybe you're on a biologic, I think, and you know how much expensive those are, and they're getting more. Every time you turn around, it's a $4,000 or $5,000 infusion for everything now. And it's every month you got, where's that money coming from? Your insurance company picks it up, so your copay is $400 a month. Well, that's not that bad, but guess where the rest of that money's going? The drug company's still making that profit on there. It's just, it's going to taxpayers, going to why is your healthcare premium $800 a month or something like that? It's crazy times for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, you hit it on the head. And not only that, you see it's at every level of government too, where this is acknowledged. My favorite and the foremost economist of our time, Seyfedin Amos, who's a big fan of yours.
I know Seyfedin.
He pointed out that some of this public health is being influenced by inflation as well and monetary policy, which was just hit on the head in 2021 when the Federal Reserve Bank, came out and recommended people eat tofu instead of turkey for Thanksgiving.
Oh, to save money. Yeah.
The Federal Reserve Bank be telling people to eat tofu. And you see, it's because of inflation and wanting people not to feel the effects of it as intensely. And it's mind-boggling at every level of banking, government, finance, research funding that this is insidiously crept in.
Yeah, for those people who don't know, Safe he's the author of something called the Bitcoin Standard. He's a huge Bitcoin advocate for some. I know some people are like, that's crazy. It's funny money. It's whatever. And again, and I've got a little bit of stuff invested in. I've got a little bit of Bitcoin I've held since I just hold it and hopefully something good comes of it. And I've had dinner with Safe several times. He's a great guy. Like he wanted to write a book with me about carnivore diet before I wrote it. And then he got sidetracked into writing his book. And then eventually the publisher contacted me to write a book independently. So I ended up doing that. But yeah, and this is a thing. There's a lot of people that once you see through the sham that nutrition is, wait a minute, we've been lied to for 50 years about nutrition. Because clearly, how do you know you've been lied to? Because I ate a bunch of steak and I got healthy and you told me I'd be sick and dead and it didn't happen. So obviously that's wrong. Then you start looking at what else is wrong. What other kind of BS are they feeding me? And you see it, it opens your eyes and you see it a lot. And it's shocking, quite honestly, because you're like, oh my God, everything's built upon a lie to something. And of course, you get labeled, you're a conspiracy crazy person. But I don't know, man. It's crazy times we live in.
Yeah, man, great point. And I think the biggest message I try to send to patients and family members on the tail of that is just that don't forget that you're a part of science. Your observations are valid. And when you're interpreting what other people are recommending to you and suggesting, you also have a right to take that with a grain of salt, try it, measure your observations, that's science, and then set a new course. There's a lot of interest out there in your behavior and your purchasing habits and your diet. And it's unfortunate, but you have to be your own advocate. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, and you're at the tip of the spear, seeing the everyday people coming in suffering from whatever. They're suffering acutely from either the chronic disease or some sort of trauma or some accident or something like that. And it's one of those things where when somebody breaks their femur and they're in your ER and screaming in pain, they don't care about what's going to make me live to be 100 at that time. And they're literally, they've got this acute pain. And I think that's something that, even in chronic disease, I mean, somebody's walking around every day depressed. Do you think they care if they live to 100 or not? I don't think they care, honestly. And so it's like, why don't we worry about focus on fixing what's acutely in front of us or what's subacutely in front of us in the current terms of chronic disease? And we see that we can do that, but instead we've got this mentality of LDL cholesterol. We got to get it down. Well, what if I feel like crap? It's okay. It's okay if you feel like garbage.
What about women I see, I'm not exaggerating, maybe 40% of all women I get a CBC on have a low MCV or a clear indication of iron deficiency. And a lot of them have iron deficiency anemia. And there's literature out there showing that I think it was about 40% of pregnant women struggle with iron deficiency anemia. And that's a huge problem with morbidity and not only their exercise tolerance, quality of life, but fetal development. That is absolutely huge. What's the best source of dietary iron?
Yeah, steak. Yeah,
right.
Or liver, I guess would be even. But it is something, and iron has implications on mental health, and there's all these things. And we just, like I said, I think there has to be. I'm glad, like I said, the thing that I find positive is I see more and more physicians, you being one, and there are thousands now of physicians that have said, this is BS. So we're seeing some glimmers of hope there. Now, again, much of medicine is becoming corporatized. You look at how many hospital systems are being bought up by these big giant corporations, and it's just toe the line. Let's toe the line. And we saw through some of the COVID stuff, if you maybe wanted to think independently, they threatened your license, which I thought was very disturbing to see that. And I was like, I'm glad I'm not in a hospital practicing right now because I would have lost my shit. I think. I don't know. Who knows? But I just think it's just crazy with that. What do you, obviously you bought into the ER. That's probably a great situation for you. Do you see that, because obviously you're passionate about diet and nutrition and chronic disease, do you see a role where you might someday do something on the nutrition side?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think about it almost every day and almost in some ways, and I think other doctors maybe you talk to feel similarly, that I'm profiting from this illness. I acutely intervene, and I'm not putting people on Ozempic and metformin and insulin, but I benefit from people coming in every day with the consequences of their chronic illness, which a huge percentage of them are due to dietary intervention. Yeah, I guess I've done a fair bit of soul searching about it. It's hard to know where to plug into because it's a pretty risky venture, and I have tremendous respect for what you're doing with Rivero. And maybe that's something I could collaborate on with you. I think it's really going to take a team, a critical mass.
Yeah, like I said, we are just moments away from our initial launch and then as we expand and stuff like this. So obviously we want physicians that are philosophically and intellectually aligned with what we're doing. And like I said, a lot of physicians are going to be like a couple days a week or a day a week. I do Rivero, and then other days I do my regular thing. And that, like I said, obviously I always like having people that have done it themselves because they're like, I get it. I get low carb. I get carnivore. I get ketogenic diets. I get their utility in disease. And a lot of patients, the frustrating thing is a lot of patients, they're trying to do the right thing with nutrition and they go to their physician and they just get stonewalled or they get discouraged because the physician says, well, good job. You lost 50 pounds and you came off your diabetic meds and your hypertension's under control. You no longer hurt and you're no longer depressed. But you got to stop that crazy diet because one day you're going to get cancer or one day you're going to have heart disease. And it's just, what? That's not helpful. It's basically harmful in my view. But yeah, it's interesting. We'll see what happens. I'm excited about that. You'd mentioned you see this increase in obesity. I'm sure you see these patients that come in time and time again, these obese people like cellulitis, and they come in there all the time. I remember we had a guy that I was rounding orthopedic, and I'd always have my total knee patients in there. And I see this guy that he was like 500 pounds and he'd be rolling in there. He'd be in there for months. And he'd just been inpatient for 2 months at a time. And you see him walking around the halls with his red legs, cellulitis. And I think I talked to his physician, one guy, that I said, hey man, just get this on a low carbohydrate diet. My gosh. But the hospital doesn't even support that. It's funny. Do you guys serve food where you have an inpatient facility? So I guess you must serve food then, right?
Yeah, what we do actually, because there's no way we could prepare better food. We contract with local restaurants and we just get food delivered. So we have a dietitian who does meal planning, but then we have food we order from local restaurants in Tucson, which are amazing. And we just do temp checks to make sure that it's hot. And no low carb diets, that's for sure.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see because as a diabetic gets in the hospital, it's sliding scale insulin. So we're going to hit them with insulin if their blood glucose gets above 140 or 180, depending. And then we just feed them waffles and syrup. And it's just like an orange juice. And so what the hell are you doing? This is crazy. I know there's a doc named Mark Cucuzella who's in West Virginia, and it's kind of interesting. He celebrated, it was like 10 years ago, 8 years ago, he got the hospital actually to collaborate and put in a low carb menu option. It was a big victory. And then some new corporation bought it out and said, nah, F that, we're not doing that. Here, go with the cheap crap that we've been doing all the time. So it's frustrating to see that. And you shouldn't go to the hospital and literally be poisoned by the food you're getting. But hopefully, like I said, maybe you can just cook them a ribeye. Say, here you go. I'll hook you up.
I'm a hot plate. I'll just cook two. One for you, one for me. No, that's astonishing. I was just looking at an article in the New England Journal. In 2003, they published a study showing low carb is better for weight loss and improving markers of insulin resistance. 2003. But of course, at the end, they said we shouldn't recommend this yet because more research is required. 20 years ago, that the most respected journal, supposedly in the world, was acknowledging this. And here we are, like you said today, we're giving maple syrup to our cellulitis diabetic patients who are admitted.
Yeah, it is shocking and stuff. Unfortunately, Shawn, we are running out of time here. Do you have social media? Are you like a social media? I know you got a little bit on Twitter. Or do you do any other Instagram or any of that stuff?
I don't produce much content. I'm basically a nose down working as a clinician, but I do. I am on X every day because of the content and everything I learned from it, like your feed and others. Yeah, I'm on X if anyone wants to engage.
And it's just Shawn Murphy. What is it? I can't even remember.
It's at Dr. Shawn Murphy.
At Dr. Shawn Murphy.
Okay. It's SEAN spelling.
Yeah, I was going to say, I saw that. So I'm guessing there's some Irish with you. It can be more of an Irish name, I'm guessing. Or maybe I'm wrong. Is that Irish?
Oh, yeah. I'm almost,
It could be. I guess it could be Shawn O'Murphy, and that would be even more Irish.
Murphy,
but that's pretty much there. So anyway, Shawn, thank you so much for, one, doing what you're doing as a physician and also taking the time to chat with us. And like I said, as we expand with the company, we'd love to have people like yourself and other physicians that are, like I said, philosophically aligned and get it. It's part of the deal. And so we've got coverage in all 50 states, but like I said, those guys are going to get filled up pretty soon, and then we're going to need more people. And so it might be something to consider. Anyway, thank you, Shawn. Appreciate it.
Hey, it's an honor. Thank you so much, Shawn.
All right, guys, we will see everybody back tomorrow. You guys have a great day. Thanks, everybody. See you soon. Bye-bye.